Impact of the war on populations of participating countries of World War I. As we know, the World War I started in 1914 and officially ended in 1919 with the Treaty of Versailles. Here we have a little list of the most affected countries during the war. Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, those were known as the Central Powers, and then we have Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Romania, Canada, Japan, and the United States. They were known as the Allied Powers or the Entente Powers. During this war, there were many affected aspects, like inflation, or most specifically, hyperinflation. There are various definitions for hyperinflation, but according to Philip Kagan, hyperinflation is when the price increases amount to more than 100% in a month, the equivalent of 30,000% in a year. This thing of the inflation really affected the people, but most importantly, the whole country and the whole system of the world in total. But today I'll be talking about how most specific things affected populations and how we can still see that effect on nowadays populations or civilians. Okay, so first of all, I want to talk about casualties, or common known as deaths. The total number of deaths includes 9.7 million military personnel and about 10 million civilians. The Entente Powers, also known as the Allies, lost about 5.7 million soldiers, while the Central Powers lost about 4 million. Here I'm going to be adding a chart, or a most common known as demographics, so that you can visualize better how everything was divided and how the casualties were divided. Most of the casualties were combat related. They were accidents, or they were provoked by diseases, or prisoners of war, because the prisoners of the war were poorly treated and they weren't living in a very good condition, so they would eventually die. And most of the casualties during World War I are due to war-related famine or disease. I really like to link this as a domino effect so that you can visualize it better, and that's how I like to visualize it, because everything led to another thing and everything was linked. So casualties were of course linked to birth rates. Birth rates collapsed. In France, birth rates went down to about 1.4 million, and that's the number of military men that died. So we can see how it links and how men getting killed during the war or getting deployed for the war was a really important cause for these birth rates to collapse in Europe in that time, because there were no men in the household to procreate any life at all. Here we can visualize how in the years we had this World War I, the birth rates collapsed, and just after the war officially ended, the birth rates went up to normal numbers again. So as I was talking about, visualizing this domino effect is a really important thing in this presentation to understand this topic better, because as casualties led to birth rates going down or collapsing, birth rates collapsing also led to widows. This is an important subtopic, the widows during the war, because they suffered a lot. For example, Kitty Eckersey was a British civilian wife of a serving military and a server by driving an ambulance to the trenches and picking up wounded military. When she found out that her husband had died during the war, she said, and I quote, "I felt I didn't want to live. I had no wish to live at all because the world had come to an end for me. I had lost all that I loved." However, the impact on this woman was just not emotional. At the time, men were paid much higher wages than women, 26 shillings per week on average compared to 11 shillings for working women. The loss of a husband also often meant losing the main breadwinner in a family, because not all women were granted a pension. A woman who married an ex-soldier that had been discharged from the army will not get a pension if he later died from war wounds. So this was obviously really stressful for housewives. It was a really big change in the household, and even though they were granted a pension, it was not that good for a great lifestyle in that time. And it obviously led to another thing, as I already explained about the domino effect. Okay, so it obviously led to depression. Inflation changes on the household because women had to work, they didn't have a husband, they needed to leave their kids with other people or with government institutions. Also, casualties and enterprises having a problem with absorbing veterans because they didn't have a profession at all, or they just had psychological damages, led to depression because veterans after the war, as it is already marked in the presentation, they returned with high levels of depression and with mental illnesses. So it was really difficult for their family and for other people to just absorb them as they were in the community after the war. And it was a really stressful time for everyone. But here I have a little chart of the rates of depression before, during, and after the war. And as we can see here, the male rates were the ones that got the higher number during the war and after the war. And females weren't as high as males, but they really had a difference from the before the war. And as we can see, all of these we can just summarize everything up and conclude that it really changed our community nowadays because, for example, I like to put it that way, I like seeing children as plants. I like to use that metaphor because in order to make your plants grow healthy and just in a good way, they need love, they need water, they need all the attention they can get. And that's the same with kids. They just need a loving mother or a loving father. They need a mother figure and a father figure to just follow them and for them to take care of them. It was just really difficult for parents to leave their kids with other people, with strangers. And nowadays we tend to see that normal, but it's just not that normal due to the psychological effects this will be provoking in kids. And that's just how the war also impacted our nowadays society. And I mean, this war was just many years ago, and we would just be like, no, this didn't affect at all. But if we really make an observation and just stop a second and just visualize how our society has changed during these years, we can just see how population really got affected by the war.